samples and 67% of the non-pregnant women's blood samples. So it's actually the women who were pregnant and the fetuses had more exposure and more vulnerability to that exposure than the non-pregnant women did. This is a small study of 300 women in Canada, but there are no other studies for comparison with these results because, as I just mentioned, the studies on other mammals have found amounts of Cry1AB toxin in the gastrointestinal contents of livestock-fed GM corn, raising concerns about the toxin in insect-resistant GM crops, but that they have not been done on human trials. What this leads me to believe and to question is that the toxin may not be effectively eliminated in humans, and there may be a high risk of exposure through consumption of contaminated meat. So given the potential toxicity of these environmental pollutants and the fragility of the fetus, the authors called for more research to be conducted. The point of contact between humanity, God, and nature is a biblical one. The Bible says that God formed man out of the soil of the garden. Jesus presents his metaphors of heaven in terms of nature. The kingdom of heaven, he tells us, is a seed that grows in a mighty tree. It is the yeast that causes the flower to rise. It is the school of fish caught in a net. Christ doesn't use metaphors that were peculiar to his day. He doesn't say that the kingdom is like a chariot race or a richly woven fabric or even a beautiful temple. The kingdom, he says, is like a grapevine. God makes the waters flow, part, and become walkable. He is the master of all nature. As I said to you in the beginning of this presentation, what I hope that you will leave here with are really good questions, not answers. This has been one of the hardest presentations I've ever given because the answers aren't clear and because it's a little tough to be a non-Christian convening a conference on Christian responses to food and agriculture, and I'm grateful that you are willing to hear me today. I'm not a scientist and I'm not a farmer. I am someone who knows, though, that food should be a source of health, not harm. And if we recognize the sanctity of the seed, then I ask what role we must play as people of faith, of all faiths, in protecting that seed. I will conclude with also asking the question of the feelings of people receiving that seed. If you could move to the last slide, which you won't be able to see, but I'll just pull out some last lines about it. The first South African Council of Churches consultation on genetically modified organisms was held back in May of 2004, and they expressed concern about transgenic technology. I want to highlight a few of the things that they, talked about here. The commodification of life and the monopolization of knowledge through the patenting of genes in living organisms. The scientific uncertainties about the long-term economic, nutritional, health, and ecological risks of gene transfer technologies, given the irreversibility of the release of genetically engineered products into the environment. Once they're there, we can't take it back. Once the soil is contaminated, we can't clean it up. And once the soil is gone, we don't get to retrieve it. And that's why it's so very incredible what Nancy and Phil and so many others have worked so tirelessly to do to preserve our most sacred soils here in Douglas County. The lack of public awareness and debate on GMOs, including the faith community's own lack of participation in genetically modified policy developments, and the tendency for scientists and policymakers to treat GMOs as a purely technical manner, delinking science from ethics, values, economics, and ideology. I think the Pope actually summarizes this last point best. He says, technology is never merely technology. It reveals man and his aspirations toward development. It expresses the inner tension that impels him gradually to overcome material limitations. Technology in this sense is a response to God's command to till and to keep the land that he has entrusted to humanity. And it must serve to reinforce the covenant between human beings and the environment, a covenant that should mirror God's creative love. Thank you. We're probably on schedule, but I would love it if anyone has any questions. I'm also happy to answer them. Yes, Bart.
An interesting sort of add-on, because I'm farming a far about Roundup Ready soybeans is that it is a major factor in reducing the loss of soil organic matter through the excessive cultivation that used to be applied to soybeans in order to control the weeds. So there's a side to this where we need to say, we're maybe we're trying to preserve soil, doing things that can reduce the amount of tillage, especially in the lighter soil such as wheat, farm down in the bottom. There's another aspect that's positive. It just has to get in here and be weighed. And so I'm going to add that into your batch of things in terms of we have to come up with good questions because I was taught a long time ago that a question well asked is half answered.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for that. Great. Well, I don't have my program in front of me, but I think is it time for a break?
Yeah.
Is it time for Brian? It's time for that.
No, we're going to come back like half an hour. We're actually half an hour behind. That's okay. So
Okay.
extra time for lunch. So perfect.
Terrific. Great. Well, we'll just take a break. There's tea downstairs, and that is going to share.
Yep.